Hi, I'd like you to consider your own wardrobe for a moment. How many t-shirts do you own? Okay, now that you've got that in your mind, do you know where those t-shirts were made? What fibers are in your shirts? Do you know how much you paid for them or where you bought them? Do you wear all of those t-shirts? The thing is, the fast fashion industry affects all of us because it affects the environment we live in. As Americans, we're not used to considering where our clothing comes from or how it was made or how the materials that go into our clothing affect the environment. But I'm here today to talk to you about fast fashion and how it affects the environment around us. Fast fashion is clothing that's produced quickly and cheaply. It's meant to be used for a short time, and it's meant to be purchased in huge quantities. And as Americans, we are feeding right into this industry. The fashion industry as a whole is a $1.2 trillion industry. The United States makes up a fifth of that industry at $250 billion per year. Over the last 5 years, traditional fashion retailers grew 6.8%. That's a lot. But fast fashion retailers grew 9.7% per year. This is a huge industry, and we are all participating in it. If you take a look at this first slide I have for you, you can see that global fashion consumption is up 400% in the last 2 decades. That means 20 years ago, we were consuming 20 billion articles of clothing globally, and today we're consuming 80 billion. Our population has not increased by 400% in that time. We are consuming more. This consumption has massive effects on the environment. When it comes to how clothing is manufactured, the biggest culprit is leather. A lot of you probably already know about the devastating effects leather production has on the environment, so I won't go into great detail now, except to say that there are about 15 stages in the leather treatment and tanning process. 11 of those stages release extremely toxic chemicals and organic matter into the environment. And as you may well know, leather is often produced in places that don't have good environmental protection policies, which means that these chemicals end up in the local water system and soils. Cotton makes up a third of all the fibers used in our clothing. Cotton is a very water-intensive crop. It takes 2,700 liters of water to make one t-shirt. That's the amount of water you and I drink in 2.5 years. In addition, inorganically grown cotton uses a lot of insecticides. 24% of the global insecticide use and 11% of global pesticide use is due to cotton farming. And yet, cotton farming actually only takes up 3% of arable land in the world. If you look at this next slide, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, if leather is bad for the environment, cotton's bad for the environment, what about synthetic fibers? A lot of synthetic fibers are extremely harmful to the environment as well because of the chemical processes used to make those fibers. Polyester is one of the most famous and widely used synthetic materials, but polyester itself has 2 times the carbon footprint of cotton. In 2015, polyester processing released 1.5 trillion pounds of greenhouse gases into the environment. That's the equivalent of the annual emissions of 185 coal-fired power plants. That's too much. When it comes to what we do with our clothing when we're done using it, we've got to consider the fact that Americans buy 60% more clothing than we did in the year 2000, but we keep each item for half the length of time. We're each generating 82 pounds of waste per year. That's more than half the weight of the average American woman. What's happening to all that waste? Well, estimates vary, but at the very best, a quarter of that clothing is reused, either reworn or recycled into rags or housing insulation. That means 3/4 of the clothes that you and I discard every year either gets incinerated or ends up in a landfill, as you can see in the image here. Pakistan and India are 2 of the biggest importers of US used clothing, and it's likely that most of our clothing ends up in landfills in those countries. Now, you've heard all the statistics that I've had to share with you today, and you're probably wondering to yourself, what can I do about this? Well, there's 2 solutions I've come up with in my own life that I'd like to share with you. The first is probably the most obvious: consume less and wear longer. Look for higher quality clothes. They're going to cost you more, but if you're buying fewer of them, that's okay. Avoid synthetic materials and look for organic cotton. Look for basic pieces that you can layer and that make your wardrobe feel full even if you don't have as many clothes as you're used to. And investigate the factory practices of the companies you shop with. How do they treat their workers? What are their environmental protection policies? The second idea I have for you is something newer called clothes swapping. This is where people get together and exchange wardrobes so that they satisfy that need for a constant change of their wardrobe, but they don't contribute to the fast fashion industry and the ultimate environmental degradation that that industry contributes to. I hope you'll consider some of these options, and the next time you're out buying a t-shirt, you'll think twice about who made it, what the environmental practices were of the company that made that shirt, what the fibers are that go into it, and that you'll consider how you individually can contribute to less environmental degradation through fashion. Thank you.